Okay, we're officially recording, so don't say anything.
Embarrassing.
Yeah. Alrighty. So, we just said the fourth essay topic is pick who you think is the most influential philosopher and explain why. Any questions? I will answer whatever questions you have. Anywhere on the review sheet. Well,
you just go over the first forced migration. It was like,
all right, the forced migrations. We had two kind of different forced migration patterns. We had slavery, where we were basically taking Africans out of Africa, bringing them to America, where they became African Americans, to work the sugar plantations, to work the tobacco plantations, cotton plantations, and there was zero choice in that whatsoever. You had rival tribes in Africa. They would capture one another and sell them off to the Europeans. So you ended up having the situation of having some tribes in Africa becoming wealthier than others because they were more adept at capturing their enemies and selling them off. Then your other forced migration is the development of some of the British colonies. You had Australia, New Zealand were convicts. It was a convict colony. Primarily it was convicts coming out of the poorhouse. So we're not talking about sending murderers, rapists. We're not talking about like major felonies here. We're talking about people who got into debt, were in debtor's prison, and couldn't earn their way out of debtor's prison. So what do? You ship them off to a prison colony, because who better to use as basically cheap labor when setting up your colony than convicts? Because most people who were in the poorhouse had limited skill sets, and you didn't want to waste on the potential of disease in a new colony anyone who had really important skill set that could make you money. And so you would send kind of like your cheap workforce labor out first to set everything up, and hopefully they'll figure out if there are any like horribly bad diseases, and then you would send out your more skilled people once the colony's been set. You also have South Africa and America.
These are all under forced migration?
These are all different forced migrations. And I call them forced because, like, for America, we had a whole bunch of people who migrated over completely voluntarily. They either had the money to do so, or they came over as indentured servants, worked for a period of years, gained their freedom, and that paid for their passage. But you also have some people who were forced to come to the U.S. because of religious reasons. If you are a religious refugee, are you not forced to flee? So that's why it's still in forced migration. You have a similar thing with South Africa. It's not so much religious persecution, but in South Africa you have the British coming in, and you get kind of a little bit of the flavor of the slavery and the prison colonies combined in South Africa. Just because of kind of like their geographic location, they were influenced by the development of both. So that is forced migration.
yeah. Didn't they like make money off of like a pit stop to like India? Like, wasn't that like a?
Yeah, that's precisely why they wanted South Africa, is because it allowed a safe harbor for the British ships to stop off at before they continued on to India. But also, you could have ships going from India to South Africa going back and forth, and so the ships having to go up to Britain would only be forced to kind of sail down to South Africa, and they would have to complete that whole trip up to India.
Yeah.
And so they could just go back and forth between South Africa and England. So you could shorten your trip, and that was economically important. Amanda.
What would be like the main part about, or the main thing about Australia and New Zealand? And then
Um, just the fact that it was a prison colony. Australia and New Zealand weren't totally economically important, except for the fact that it gave Britain kind of like a home port close to Southeast Asia. Because the reason why Britain loves India, loves the islands in Southeast Asia, wanted to get up into China, is spices and tea. And Australia gave you kind of,
Spice game or something.
well, it's not that the spices grew in Australia, and it's not that tea grows in Australia. It's that it gave them kind of a foothold in the region. So it's easier for you to work out trading agreements and actually monitor if you're physically there. And when they set up these colonies, they hadn't taken over India yet. India doesn't get colonized until the Civil War in the late 1850s, early 1860s. So Australia was their foothold until they took over India. When you take a look at Australia, Australia doesn't have a lot of resources that were interesting to the British at this point in time. It was literally the landmass. Plus, their debtors' prisons were completely overflowing. They had to do something with all those debtors. So why not start up a new colony somewhere? And this furthered the goal of having the British Empire where the sun never set. They had land so spread out around the globe that no matter where the sun was on the planet, it was shining down on some aspect of their empire.
Yeah, it's like similar to New Zealand too.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And was cotton in America cheaper to get than India?
at the time, like prior to the Civil War, it was much cheaper to get cotton from America. One, because shorter travel. It's much shorter to travel across the Atlantic Ocean than going east-west and having to go all the way down and then around to India. Also, India already was industrialized in terms of their cotton industry. They were making cloth. And so they weren't exporting the raw cotton, they were exporting cloth. It's not until the Civil War happened and they could no longer get a reliable source of raw cotton from the States that they then said, okay, well, let's go into India, we will de-industrialize them, stop all their factories, and take all their raw cotton. Which is pretty crummy of them. Other questions? Amanda?
What should we know about the slavery in America?
The main things you need to know about slavery is how did you get the slaves in Africa? And it's primarily through the tribal warfare. Why were they economically important? They were working on plantations where the death rate was pretty high. It was actually cheaper to buy a slave than it was to employ indentured servants or the lower class in the area. And quite frankly, some of the places that they used them, it was very dangerous. Like the silver mines in Peru, the sugar plantations in the Caribbean. You were in grave danger of physical kind of injury or death. And there was also high rates of disease.
So basically, the British were like the most successful in all of this.
But the British actually weren't the ones that acquired the most slaves. Remember, the silver mines, that was Spanish. And most of the Caribbean was Spanish or French. So a great portion of the slaves went down there. It wasn't until you had the cotton and tobacco plantations in North America that you really start getting more slaves going there. The majority of the slaves actually went into the Caribbean and South America.
So for like essay question that we had on the test a while ago, like how did the Atlantic slave trade affect Africa? It just affected like its like economics, right? Or
Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at Africa, you are seeing, not only do you have the decline in the male population in Africa. And actually not just male. They did take females as well. You have a decline in population that was hard to overcome. You also encourage tribal warfare. And that leads to instability. But on the plus side, you actually did bring quite a bit of wealth to the continent of Africa because of the price they paid per head. And you also got the Europeans interested in, well, is Africa only good for getting slaves, or does Africa have more? So when they actually stop the slave trade, they don't stop trading with Africa. They just start trading other things because they realize, oh, you've got palm oil and all these different fruits and trees, and they figure out there's so much more to Africa. And we'll see that in the next unit when we get to imperialism. And we have like a big Africa map on the floor, and we scramble for pieces of it, as if we were the European countries. No questions? Continue.
Okay, so with the silver trade with China, was that when it had to like do with like Spain and like South America, right? When you had it?
Yeah. China had its economy based mainly on silver. Taxes were paid in silver. Any trade that they had with the Europeans was done in silver. Like the Europeans would have to pay in silver. They loved silver. And they originally were getting their silver from Japan. Japan doesn't have as much silver as South America does. So when the Spanish find silver in South America, they start trading it with China. And what did China do with the silver? They buried it. They literally buried it in the ground because they thought, oh, what a great investment. We've got all this silver, we'll be incredibly wealthy. Well, what happens when you increase the amount of silver that's in the market?
Inflation.
The value goes down.
Yeah, you have inflation. So the amount you can buy with your piece of silver goes down because prices go up on the goods compared to the silver. Well, this collapses the Chinese economy because their silver isn't worth very much anymore. And so as a result of this, they said, forget Europeans, we don't need them anymore. And that's when they go into the Ming seclusion. As a side effect, well, as a direct result of this, not only does China's economy collapses, but Spain's economy collapses as well, because it was heavily based on the silver. And if the silver isn't worth as much anymore, and they've been accruing lots of high costs because of the Armada battle with Elizabeth, the English pirates taking over the Spanish galleons, thanks Sir Walter Raleigh. When you've got that going on, Spain goes into an economic tailspin, and Spain ceases to be a major world power as a result of this. I mean, if we think about the beginning of the year when we started off, Spain was one of like the powers. It was Spain and China. And as a result of the silver trade, both of them disappear, and it places Britain in the position of taking over and becoming the most powerful nation in the world.
Like, and on the study guide, there's a couple like names that like some people like didn't do as a project or like
The only names you're responsible for are the ones that you guys did
in class.
in class or were in your textbook that you read.
Alright.
All the names are on there because other sections will be having a test that have those names on it because they have them in their class. And since I make generally 2 to 3 versions of each test for each class, that means I'll be making 8 to 12 versions of the midterm. Amanda.
For the revolutions from different countries, what is it that we specifically need to know?
All right. Political revolutions with the countries. France, America, the Latin American ones. I want you to know what were the goals for each of those countries. What did they
Oh my god.
What did they want to accomplish as a result of the revolution? So did they want equality of classes? Did they want to get rid of the monarch? Did they want to increase their economy? Like, what was their goal? And then what actually happened as a result of the revolution? Did they achieve their goals? Did they only partially achieve? Were they successful for a short period of time and then failed, like France? So that's what I want you to kind of come away with is what did they hope would happen and what actually did happen? And be able to kind of compare and contrast them. Know who the important people are in terms of leaders. Oh, and the essay question, when I say compare and contrast like a European with an American, U.S. is actually considered European in that regard. Because it's way more like France than it is like the Latin American.
So
What
it
do you
can't be
mean?
European versus American.
So that the compare contrast between a European and an American one, the U.S. is a quote European.
So
It'd be like you could compare like the U.S. versus Argentina, or you could do France versus Haiti, but you can't do France versus the U.S.
So like, what question would be like compare and contrast, like the political, social, and like economic?
Yeah, I'll be asking something about the goals and outcomes.
Alright.
So I want you to compare and contrast. The other reason why I want to use U.S. as quote European in that regard is because it's
Dan
relative-
Crowley, if you're in the building, come to the attendance office. Dan Crowley, if you're in the building, please come to the attendance office.
It's because it's typically one of our few successful revolutions. So I would rather you compare and contrast that with one of the Latin American ones where we have issues. Holly.
For the Industrial Revolution, when you say the rest of the world, do you just mean the countries that...
The countries that we did in our simulation, the fact that the colonies weren't as industrialized as your European nations, and the industrialization that did happen in the colonies was really more for the benefit of your mother countries. If you think about the railroads that had been put in, if you think about the ease of transportation, communication, those kind of things were actually put in to help make it easier for the raw resources to be moved. So I want you to be able to know that, industrialization didn't happen at the same pace everywhere around the world. That you have kind of a different rhythm depending on what country you're looking at. But that being said, you've got similar issues in each of the countries in terms of the battle between the haves and the have-nots. That the ruling elite and the merchants tend to be in the positions of power. The farmers and the workers tend to have no power, and kind of the religious and intellectuals, they kind of float in between the two. So the issues remain the same regardless of what country, it's just how badly the issue affected them. And in terms of the Industrial Revolution question, if you did want to use any of the social profile information, I did put the full social profiles for all 9 countries and 6 social classes per country up on Moodle. So you're more than welcome to look at those. Yes?
Is there going to be a map?
No map this time. There will be a map on the final, because we have imperialism in the World Wars.
I like the maps. Yeah.
But there's no map this time. Yes.
Can you go over the Columbian Exchange?
All right, Columbian Exchange. We're talking about the exchange of goods and ideas between the New World, which is the Americas, North and South, with Europe. And with Asia.
So-
Silver trade was not the only thing that went to China. What food product here in the United States can you find in lots of Chinese food, especially Szechuan and Thai? I'll give you a hint. It's got nut in the name, but it's actually not a nut.
Butternut.
Peanuts. Peanuts are not nuts. They're legumes.
Okay.
But peanuts did not originally grow over there.
Let's make that our bonus question. Oh, do we have a bonus question in the midterm? We should make one.
I'll think about a bonus question. But peanuts were one of the foods that actually came from the New World, went over to China, and helped increase the Chinese population because peanuts have protein in them. And so that helped increase their food production. So you've got all your different foods that came over to Europe, came over to Africa. So it's more the idea of kind of like the main things that came over. Think global pitch from last year. We kind of went over them again, and know more about the flow of products and the flow of ideas, and the flow of disease. We wipe out the majority of the Native American population because of smallpox and other European diseases that they had never encountered before.
Flow of disease, what else?
Ideas, food products. The Columbian Exchange is what helps fuel our first global trade, because you're literally connecting all the continents together with it, except for Australia, but Australia is small.
Was it like the Glorious Revolution that like started? You know, like what was the first revolution that's like triggered all the other like revolutions that we were talking about?
All right. If you take a look at England, you have, after the death of Elizabeth, you bring in the Stuart monarchs. And you start with James VI of Scotland, who's James I of England. He's the first Stuart monarch. And he's an absolute ruler, but he doesn't believe in the whole like Tudor balance of power that all the Tudors had agreed with Parliament in terms of, we will take foreign policy, you can handle most of the domestic stuff, and we'll work together. Stuarts were, I'm an absolute monarch, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. James doesn't live too terribly long, a few decades, manages to kind of get through. His son Charles I ends up being a real brat, really awful. And so Charles I is the one who is overthrown by the Roundheads. That's our English Civil War. Oliver Cromwell, the parliamentarian army, got the nickname of the Roundheads because of the hats they wore. They captured Charles and they decided to execute him for his crimes against the country. Oliver Cromwell ends up becoming a dictator. And upon his death, his son tries to take over, only lasts for 2 years, and people are like, this whole English Civil War isn't what it's cracked up to be. And they determined that Parliament could no longer exist without the monarchy, then the monarchy could exist without the Parliament. So they established a constitutional monarchy. And they brought back the Stuarts. And the first one to come in was Charles II. He wasn't too good, but he died, no child. So his brother James II comes in, and James II is a real idiot. He only lasts for a few years before they kick him off the throne and said, you know what? We as Parliament have the right to determine who is king. And this is the Glorious Revolution. They invite William of Orange, his wife Mary, who is one of James's daughters, to come and take the throne as proper Protestant monarchs. And William and Mary agree to all the different documents that make up the collective English Constitution. And so it limits the power of the monarchy.
Can you repeat what you said? Parliament cannot exist without the monarchy?
Parliament cannot exist without the monarchy, nor can the monarchy exist without Parliament.
And the first
They are intrinsically tied together. Just like how we have checks and balances within our government between Congress, the presidency, and the judicial branch, Parliament and the monarchy are kind of check one another.
And it was James what's his name? The first Stuart
The first Stuart
after Elizabeth.
after Elizabeth, he was called James the Sixth of Scotland, but he was James the First of England. And ironically enough, he's the one who combines the two countries into one, into Great Britain. And what does Scotland want now? But to leave and have their own country. They at least have their own parliament right now. Parliament's devolved. Other questions? Yes?
Under the rise of nation states and changes in empires, the English Civil War and the rise of the constitutional monarchy.
What about it?
What about it?
Well, we just talked a lot about the whole timeline of it with the Stuarts, Oliver Cromwell. So you need to know that the English Civil War and the rise of constitutional monarchy was a response to absolutism.
Okay.
When we took a look at the other rulers, they had these challenges to their absolute power. Well, England ended up hitting a huge challenge because their absolute monarch was really horrible and bad and stupid. They clearly didn't learn their lesson from one of the most intelligent monarchs ever, which was Elizabeth. She could play the political game very well. Very, very well. As did her father, Henry VIII. I mean, what other monarch was able to basically dramatically change the country in terms of the religion? Yeah.
What are the enlightened despots?
Enlightened despots, those are our absolute rulers that actually kind of followed along and used some of the Enlightenment ideas.
Okay.
So like Catherine the Great was an enlightened despot, Frederick the Great, and I'm missing an Austrian.
Is there a Joseph? Was there a Joseph?
Yes.
Joseph the Second.
Yes, he's the Austrian
Okay.
that I was thinking of.
Is that also like Habsburg, or is that like a different Austria?
The Austrian Empire was ruled by the Habsburg dynasty.
Your people's names.
All right, Catherine the Great, Frederick the Great, and Joseph
The second.
The second.
the Second. They're actually in chapter 18, which is on the Enlightenment. I want to say it's section 2. It's the one that, like, the enlightened despots are towards the end of that section.
What did they do differently than the actual enlightenment thinkers? Like if they
Well, they were still absolute rulers, but they were willing to start to look at, should we have workers' rights? Should we end slavery? Should we end feudalism? Is there any way, like Frederick the Great kind of got that title because he was kind of like the king of the people.
So they look more at like the change of law rather than like the enlightened despots who like.
Total absolute rulers said, this is what I want, this is the law. Whereas the enlightened despots, while they were still absolute
They're, like,
rulers,
working.
they attempted to rule for the benefit of their people, not for the benefit of themselves. It's not to say that they weren't selfish at some points in time, because they were,
Yeah.
but they at least attempted to rule for the people. And I was right?
Yeah.
Chapter 18, Section 2?
Would you, yeah.
Alright, yes.
What were the, like, achievements or highlights of Emperor Qi Long's, like, rule? Or what, Kuai Long? I don't know, what was it?
Qingxi and Qianlong were both of the Qian dynasty. It's been a while.
There's like a writer I wrote down, and then they have like the like 10.
He almost could be considered an enlightened despot himself. Because it's not so much that he like ruled for the people, but he was influenced by the Chinese scholars of this time. Other questions?
For the people, would we have to match them with like where they ruled?
Yes, I would expect you to know where did they rule. And I won't do like dynasties. I will say like China.
How much are you gonna expect us to know on each of these people? Just like
I'm going to expect you to know, first of all, what country are they affiliated with, what would be considered kind of like the major characteristic of their rule, and what was the challenge to their absolute rule.
So the chart that we did.
Yeah. But you don't need to know the different titles. If there were very distinct symbols, like the 3 hollyhock leaves for Tokugawa, I would expect you to know the big symbols like that. The fact that birds of prey show up in lots of our family crests. That kind of thing. So if there was like a big important image with them, you know that. Amanda?
We have to know a lot on like the royal family,
Which royal family?
like Elizabeth and like all the Henrys and all the wives and all that stuff.
No. No. Elizabeth knew that she was very much her father's daughter in terms of how she ruled. She continued that kind of like Tudor balance of power between the monarchy and the parliament.
Her father's name was
Henry VIII.
Oh right.
You should know that because last year, what was the extra credit for the final last year?
Catherine and Jane and Catherine.
Yes. Henry VIII's wives. Everyone came in singing, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived.
Justin Vasquez, if you're in the building, please come to the attendance office. Justin Vasquez, if you're in the building, please come to the attendance office.
She has such a lovely voice for that. Much better than mine. Other questions?
Oh wait, so all the Latin American revolutions, didn't they all come from Spain or Portugal except for Haiti, which came from France? Or like
Haiti was French, Brazil was Portugal, and everyone else was Spanish. But the French play a role in a lot of it because of Napoleon. Many of these revolutions only occurred because Napoleon was basically keeping everyone's interest occupied over in Europe, taking over Spain, and so there weren't sufficient troops, resources, or money to actually defend the revolutions.
And which ones were successful like today as far as like
It depends on your definition of successful. I would say Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela,
Colombia.
Chile, would probably be the most successful in terms of the number of people with a good standard of living. I mean, there's clearly still a lot of poverty, a lot of economic issues.
Do a lot of them still have like monarchs like today, or like?
No,
Oh,
but they keep flip-flopping back and forth between a democratically elected government and a military dictatorship. When things start to get rough, they go for the military dictatorship. When things kind of settle down, then they kick the military dictatorship out, and they bring back a democratically elected government. One of them down there just elected a female. Is that Brazil?
Brazil.
I think it was Brazil. Because I saw Secretary of State Clinton was congratulating her on the news.
Mhm.
So once again, other countries around the world have a female president before we do.
Yes. For the scientific revolution, is that like the medicines and?
Yeah, it's just in addition to the Enlightenment, or actually what fuels the Enlightenment is the scientific revolution, where you have this bigger interest in science, the scientific method, and you then apply this to more than just the world around us. You apply it to things like society that you normally wouldn't think about using the scientific method for. I don't ask any like really big specific questions. It's just more the fact that it helped fuel the Enlightenment by bringing in lots and lots of questions.
So the revolutions of 1830 and 1848 were the French Revolution and what's the other one?
Oh, we had more than that. You had France, you had Belgium, you had Greece.
Oh yeah, all the European.
Yeah, all those countries. So look at the BBC history article. That's why I let you keep it.
Oh yeah.
I'll collect them after the midterm.
Those.
But definitely go back, look at that 1815 to 1848 article that talks about that whole liberalism versus nationalism idea. And the fact that liberalism is inclusive, it brings in a whole lot of people, whereas nationalism is exclusive, it limits the number of people who can participate. And so if you've got those two groups competing for the hearts and minds of the people to hold a revolution, your revolution is not going to be successful because you don't get enough people in either group. Amanda?
Are the Enlightenment on both sides? So you have to know individually. You have to
Yeah, know the big ones that you did in the chart when you were taking notes on the chapter, and know what was like their big idea. Thank you for returning it. Means you can borrow it another time. So basically, just go back and look at that chart you did when you took notes on section 1 of chapter 18. I'm trying to get better about like which sections the information comes out of. Mm-hmm.
I think this is a stupid question.
There are no stupid questions, only stupid answers.
What does disillusionment mean?
Disillusionment means you are very hopeful for the future, but when the future comes and it's not what you expect, you become disillusioned. So we're all expecting to have this great big snowstorm on Wednesday so we don't have to come to school. And if we end up having to come to school on Wednesday, there'll be a whole bunch of disillusioned students. Does that explain it?
Yeah.
Because just think of the like pit of despair you'll have in yourself. You'll be like, oh my goodness, I
So
can't
it's
believe
like
I had to
upset.
come. Yes. But it's also you don't feel like you can trust what people say anymore.
You think we're gonna have school Wednesday?
I talked to Ms. Barnes after lunch. I think Wednesday's a wipeout. Yeah, I don't think it's gonna happen. I can actually stay around for a few more minutes if anyone has any more questions.
I think think I'll have questions the more I study.
Yep.
Yeah.
As you have questions, feel free to post them up on Facebook,
Yeah.
to email them. But if you post them on my wall on Facebook, other people can see the questions and answers. So I encourage the use of the Facebook wall so that I don't get asked the same question multiple times. That would be nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
You right after I walked in.
All right. Let me